Good evening, Booktopians, and welcome to Corey Tutt.
Hello, Yama, Booktopians. It is a pleasure to join you this evening and hopefully yarn about my book.
So I'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are watching today. Corey Tutt is the founder of Deadly Science, the New South Wales Young Australian of the Year for 2020, and he is the author of the new book, The First Scientists. We'll be with Corey for the next 20 to 30 minutes or so. If you have questions for Corey, please drop them into the comments, or if you want to make a comment, please do so, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can during our conversation. So to kick off, Corey, what made you decide to write The First Scientists?
One, never in my wildest dreams did I ever think that I would write a book, ever. But it really starts when I was a little boy, when I was given a book by my grandfather called Reptiles in Colour, and that was by Dr. Harold Cogger, who's a herpetologist from the University of Canberra. And this was the first ever book that was put in colour for reptiles. So like it had coloured pictures in it. And I absolutely love that book. It taught me how to read. And when you are young and you learn how to read, it opens up a whole new world for you. And books really do change lives. And when I was starting Deadly Science out and I was working two jobs, I was working at hand-rolled pet hotels and I was working at the University of Sydney as an animal technician. I was going to Dimmicks and I was buying all these science books, like the Cosmos, the classic science books, but they all had white fellas in there. And I was working with these remote schools, and our people were the first scientists. We had a relationship with the stars that gave us the answers that, on land. Like, did you know that, First Nations people in Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, use the sky to predict the weather? This was stuff that was ingrained in it's ingrained in our culture. But then I started to ask the question, then what is science? If the artist that is mixing ochres and minerals together is not using chemistry, then what is science? And for me, I really, these kids that I was working with, there was the whole notion of you can't be what you can't see is, it's such a play on words. It's not always true, but for me, it is true, because if these kids couldn't see themselves in a book and see their ancestors in a book, and we didn't speak about it in present tense because Aboriginal people are still doing science today. And for me, there's no difference between the postdoc in a lab collecting the tissue samples and an Aboriginal person in community flying a drone and collecting data on endangered species. I think they're the same thing. So for me, it was important to create this book. So not only could Indigenous kids pick it up and they can see themselves in the book and relate to it, and then open up a whole world of doors, what science is possible and what is possible when you put your mind to it and you believe in yourself. But for non-Indigenous kids as well, because just as much of it is my history as a Kamilaroi man, it is your history too, if you were born in Australia. And we should be proud of the fact that our first people were scientists.
Can you tell us a little more about what readers can expect to find in the book?
Readers can expect to find deadly stories from all over, from bush ovens in Wiradjuri country, from astronomy to forensic science. It was before the days of CSI. We're not turning on any black lights and looking for speckles of blood. Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people were employed by the New South Wales Police and the Queensland Police to be bush trackers, to find people in the bush. And one particular story, which is in the book, is about a set of children that went missing in the Grampians in Victoria, which is, a rugged, if you're ever down there, it is a rugged bit of bushland. People go missing there and sometimes they are never found. But with the help of these first scientists, these trackers, these kids got rescued. And the idea is that people will go on a journey, they'll look at that sort of stuff, but then they'll look at the present day science, the kids at Robinson River that are learning about STEM and doing science every week, and they're passionate about it. And one of the funny things is Twitter brings out a lot of different people from, all walks of life. And I got this comment once, and it was like, I put up a photo and I said, our people were the first scientists. But then, there was a couple of photos of kids from Robinson River and they were building a volcano. And some smart aleck said, well, if they're such scientists, how come they're not wearing lab coats? So the first thing I did is I packed up lab coats. I purchased them and I sent them to the kids in Robinson River. And now they get a real kick out of it because when they do their science videos, they put these lab coats on and it transforms them, because a lab coat is just a bit of PPE. It's not about, it's not about like a white person, a middle-aged white man wearing a lab coat, because it's a bit of protective equipment. So again, I want to decolonize the lab coat, because it's just a bit of protective equipment. And it doesn't matter where you come from, what you've had for breakfast, anyone can wear a lab coat, and science is not the be-all and end-all of lab coats.
You've worked as an editor of books. We talked before a little bit about the Deadly Science books that you've put out already. You've distributed books to get them to kids in remote communities, and now you've taken the step into writing them. What's your journey through kind of the book world been like, and has writing and publishing a book been the experience that you thought it would be?
Like I said, I never in my wildest dreams thought that I would ever become an author. Even when I started Deadly Science, I didn't even think it would become a charity. This whole journey for me, from becoming the Young Australian of the Year for New South Wales, and to turning Deadly Science into something that creates hope for a lot of kids, like thousands of kids. Whether they're in a classroom, they're picking up a box that Deadly Science has donated, or a solar kit, or those sort of things. They are benefiting from this charity, this thing that we've created. And I say we because it's about my staff, it's about the communities, it's about my family that are involved in Deadly Science as well. It's more than just me. And I guess for me, I wanted to create books and stories that appeal to our children. It's just really important that kids see what they can be, and that is the first and foremost. I didn't want to create the next best Harry Potter or bestseller. It was about showing these kids that, it doesn't matter what you've had for breakfast or what skin color you are or where you come from. Science is for you. And if you take any road you take in science, and not every road is the same, and if you don't go to year 11 and 12, you can still do science. But the first and foremost for our kids is being a good person, because the best scientists have empathy.
So we've got some comments coming through in the public chat already. A lot of people saying congratulations, that they're proud of you. And we've had a question from Thomas, who asks, what attracted you to writing about science?
Well, actually, it's really funny you asked that, Thomas. I was just walking my dog, and I walk my dog pretty much twice a day, and we do a 5K loop, right? And I'm actually trying to lose a bit of weight before I get married. But I'm pretty blind, pretty short-sighted, and I was walking along, and I have this knack of spotting reptiles out of the middle of nowhere. I'm about 200 meters away, and there's this electrical box, and I see a blue-tongue lizard under it, and that really excites me, because a blue-tongue lizard has a third eye, which they use to see in color. They're the ultimate creature of bluff. They have a blue tongue, which blue in the animal kingdom generally means venomous. And they also have these black lines across their eyes, which, if you are a fan of NFL, NFL players use charcoal on their eyes, and it reduces the glare. So they have all these weapons, right? And if you have a look at a blue-tongue lizard, they have all these bumps on their skin. And so the reason why they have those bumps on their skin, so we believe, is that a brown snake, which is a predator of the blue-tongue lizard, they can't really bite them on top because their fangs are really small. But you learn that through books, right? And you learn that through science books. And these are the reasons why I wanted to write about science, because I wanted kids to pick up the Deadly Science books and go, wow, that's really cool. And I call them like party facts, because if you're a kid and you know those things, you're easily the coolest kid in the class, because you have if you can talk about echidnas, right? They're monotremes. They have these spikes, which are keratin, same stuff as your fingernails in your hair, and they're also, their back legs are back to front. They're the same, they face the same way as their front legs. That's a conversation starter. Why?
It's interesting that the first animal that you used there, the blue-tongue lizard, does that go back to that Australian Reptiles in Colour book that you received when you were a kid?
Yeah, definitely. My sister, who's commented on this as well, she'll remember this. But when I was a kid, we used to go to my auntie's farm quite a lot, and we used to live near a creek, and we used to move around a lot. But we had, the one constant in my life was reptiles. And I often remember reading this book is that water dragons hold their breath underwater for 40 minutes. So often I'd be sitting by the dam waiting for the water dragon that I've just chased in there to catch to come up for air. But, you learn that by reading, right? You learn those sort of skills. And I think that it's something that's really important for our kids, because there's two ingredients we all need, and it doesn't matter where you come from, again, and what your background is, and that's passion and purpose.
We've got another comment that's just come through from Jenny. She says her 9-year-old loves facts, and you have described the love of information so well.
Well, yeah, and again, these facts are the basis of what children need to find their passion and purpose. And what I would say to all young people watching, and old people as well, is that, again, there's no road that is wrong or right. What is right for you is, being a good person, following your passions, following your interests. If you're interested in animals, don't let anyone tell you can't work with animals, because I sat across from a careers advisor who told me that I should stick to a trade, or I'd probably end up in jail or dead based on my race and my upbringing. And that was a very difficult thing for me. But, if you keep trying and you keep being a good person, things do work out. And I think that's the greatest lesson we can teach our young people and our old people as well, is that stick to yourself and just be honest with yourself, and be around people that back you. At Deadly Science, I've got a really good team that are so supportive of everything. And, I wouldn't be able to achieve nearly as much as what I have, especially writing a book, which is it's a huge task, especially all the research that went into this book, without a really supportive team behind me and family as well.
We've had a question from Melissa. She says, my daughter wants to know, what was the most interesting thing you wrote about in your book?
The most interesting thing that I wrote about in the book, was probably, it's a really interesting question, that one, because we wrote a lot about engineering as well. And, we wrote about, obviously boomerangs and their aerodynamic design, but there was things like I learnt along the way whilst talking to elders and that, and there were things I just never considered. For example, I spoke to an elder down in Wiradjuri country, and she told me that the reeves of the river are the kidneys for the river. So when you remove the reeves and the reeves out of the river, all the dirt and all the bad stuff flows in. So it's actually really important to have reeves around the river. And I never considered that at all. And I think that's a really unique thing. When I was doing some research for the book as well, I was down in Hay in Wiradjuri country, and I looked over and I saw this huge scar in a tree. And it was massive. It would have been at least 8 foot high, this scar, and it had been a canoe that someone had cut out. And when you think about it, and you sit there and you think about it like I did, because I was pretty bored and I was sitting there and I was pondering and I was writing, doing research for my book, I thought, what, that scar's been there almost 5 times, or if not more, longer than I've been on this earth. Isn't that amazing? Like, that's cool. And someone once used that to travel down this river that I'm sitting on the bank of, and they've used that form of engineering to get from one place to another. And I'm like, you're not waiting for an Uber out in Hay, but that was like the original Uber, wasn't it? Like, and I think that's just really neat.
Yeah, and you also mentioned in the book that connection to history as well, with things like the 40,000-year-old fish traps that are potentially like the oldest man-made structures in the world, and they're in our country.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, to put it in comparison, the pyramids are 4,000 years old, which like thousands of people, millions of people in their lifetime will flock to Egypt to see these structures. And we treat them with so much respect and history and pharaohs and all that stuff. Like, we have traveling expeditions around that go to every major museum in the world. But our people are the oldest living culture. And we're the people that invented bread. We had our own bread, like, that is just, it's fascinating. And, when when we talk about colonization and we talk about all the bad things that have happened to our people, which is very well documented, we also forget about the really good things about our people. And non-Indigenous people have lost this as well. So they've lost that really important history, that history of Australia. So for us to move forward, which is happening, we need to accept the bad things and acknowledge that they happened and make that right. But we also need to celebrate the good things, like language, or the history of our people, the really beautiful culture, the amazing, like I get to see really cool deadly people every day. So I'm a bit like the Sixth Sense. I see deadly. No, but it's for me it's I think that Australia is really missing out on knowing this culture and knowing this science, and it is science. And I think that we admire Aboriginal art, Torres Strait Islander art, but we don't understand the process of how people make that art. The fact that we used egg yolks to seal it so that it's here 4,000 years later, and it might be in a cave or on a rock somewhere, but it's here. Where in the Louvre in France, they are constantly re-oiling the Mona Lisa and holding it, and like they have to hold it with special gloves. But our art lasts thousands of years. Like it's and that's really fascinating to me.
What was the process of researching the book and putting it together?
It was a really hard task because there's so much cultural knowledge, there's so many stories. Eventually I basically went back and I looked at news articles and papers, and I wrote it sort of like how I would sort of see the book. But then I spoke to elders. I asked, what do you think of this? No, that's not right. This is right. I spoke to Victor Sefferson, who is the cultural burning expert in Australia, and he's an elder. He was shown how to safely burn the country and how our people did it, and I got massive consultation from him about all that I wrote about, and it was really, really good. I spoke to about 1,500 people for the book just to make sure I got it right. And as you can see by the referencing, it is like heavily referenced. From watching videos of people making medicine to talking to an elder from that community to get permission to write it. There was a lot of stuff that went into it, to a children's book, to make it as accurate as possible. But the real thing for this is that the impact it's going to have on our kids, hopefully, when they pick up the first scientist and they read it, I want them to be proud of our First Nations people, and I want them, and if they're young, young black fellas, I want them to be proud that they come from the first scientists, the oldest living culture. And and again, it's a sort of funny title. It talks a lot about Aboriginal science, but it's a lot about modern day stuff as well that people don't think about.
We've had a question from Jennifer. She says she can't wait to read the book, and a few other people in the comments saying that they will be reading it and buying it and sharing it with their friends as well. But Jennifer says she's wondering what science experiments or activities can kids do at home while remote learning?
Well, there's actually quite a few. The director of Deadly Science, who's also a school teacher, has written the teaching notes for First Scientists. So there will be teaching notes that come with the book eventually. But there's a lot of different experiments, like making bush soap. Find out where your bush soap is in your local country and your community, and learn about that. Or even just things like observing what's around you. Like I used to play this game when I was a kid, which is really good for kids. Is that write down how many species you can see in 15 minutes if you go out into your backyard, and you'll be astonished. Sometimes, depending on where you live, you can have even a greater biodiversity than what's in the Great Barrier Reef, just in your backyard. So those sort of things are really, really good. And also the thing is that the experiments that would come out of this book would be, what about if you have a sand pit and you walk across it, but you walk across it really, really fast? Do you leave any footprints? Where did they go? Find out where the other person walked. There's things like that you can do from the book, and I think that's really exciting.
with the book, you have some fairly complicated scientific concepts in there. Like, you touched on forensic science before, and astronomy and engineering. How do you take those complicated concepts and make them so accessible to kids?
Well, I kind of think like a kid. I don't like, for me, I wouldn't want to read something that was too complicated in the sense of like I just want to get the concept of it. So I had a lot of help from Irma Gold, who was my editor on this book, and she was amazing. She had a lot of experience writing children's books, and there was quite a few times where, she would send it back to me. She's like, "This isn't good enough. You've got to write it for children," and I would write it, but it wasn't about dumbing it down or anything like that. Actually, the opposite. Kids need explanations. Kids are the best scientists. They always have the best questions. I remember having a conversation with my niece, my youngest niece, Penny, who I remember I was telling her about blue ringed octopus. And I was like, they got blue rings because they tell you they're venomous. They've got a beak and they've got this saliva that is venomous. And she's like, but why? Why do they have that? And it's like kids are always asking, but why? And I think that's why they're the best scientists, because they understand, they're always thirsty for information. And I think, when I wrote this book, I wanted kids to pick it up and be like, I need to know more about this. This is intriguing. And maybe, if the school's got an Aboriginal officer, or, they're connected to the local lands council or elders corporation, or, their community, they will ask questions. And that is a really, really good thing for a book. And I think that books that that provide just a little snippet of information for children, for them to go and say, hey, what do you know about this? And they'll be like, oh, well, I know this and this, and then they can continue their learning. So that's why this book's important.
The book is also gorgeously illustrated by Black Douglas. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that he's done and how you came to work with him on the book?
Yeah, so Black and I met a few years ago now, and we met at Marcia Langton's book launch when she wrote Welcome to Country for Kids. And when I was doing First Scientists, the publisher sort of asked, like, who is someone that you really want to do the book? And I said, I would love Black Douglas to do it, because he has such a funky way of doing things with his art. It's really awesome. Like, he takes the traditional approach, but he also makes it very modern. And I loved his artwork from the moment. And again, when we were discussing concepts for the idea, him and I were like two peas in a pod. We kind of thought about it, and he's like, why don't we put the first scientists in lab coats? And I remembered the tweet that made me send lab coats to children in remote communities. So critics on Twitter could take them seriously. I was like, yeah, that's a great idea, because again, conceptually, we are so trained into seeing middle-aged white fellas. Nothing wrong with that, being in lab coats, but no one else. So I wanted to just change the stereotype and decolonize the lab coat. So that's kind of where I was at with that. And I think it's just I just thought it was a really neat idea. And then, the ideas sort of came to life. They kept growing and they kept expanding. And, I was really grateful for Black's work on this book, because I think it really hits where I was trying to go with the book, and I'm really proud.
Do you think you'll write more books?
Oh, I wouldn't say no. I think that I'm really excited about the First Scientists, and what will come out next from that. One of the things that I want to do is, I really want to get kids into science in any way possible. And I think that there will be probably more books around the corner around that. It's just, for me, it's about giving these kids a voice. So again, in the back of the book, which I won't reveal too much because you got to go buy it, is, you'll see a lot of the stories from the deadly scientists, the deadly junior scientists, the kids that are in the school doing their science and learning. And for me, that's the best part, because if you can't be what you can't see, then my role on this earth and with deadly science is to allow these kids to see it, to see their potential.
Now, you've talked before we went live. We were having a little bit of a chat about how much of an avid book fan you are, and how much you've supported Booktopia over the years with purchases. And you brought a couple of books along that you wanted to that you were quite excited about. Did you want to share those?
Yeah, definitely. I am probably your biggest customer on Booktopia. I'm a platinum member, just for the sheer number of books that we purchase through Deadly Science for children around Australia. Basically, I think there's a few thousand now that we've actually purchased from Booktopia. So big fans of Booktopia. But I thought I'd bring along this book. This is one of my favorites, and it's called Australia's First Naturalist. And Lynette Russell and Penny Olsen, they're really good friends of mine, but they wrote this really awesome book, and it's an early introduction to Aboriginal zoology. Something that we don't really touch on in books like this is that, the relationship between animals and First Nations people. I remember my pop telling me once that, ants being inside the house meant rain. And when you sort of look back at it, they do. So like when it is about to rain and storm, you get ants in your house, right? And they're scattering around because obviously ants don't do well with water. But the magical thing about ants is that they can shut down their body and survive a flood. So they literally shut down their whole body, a bit like spiders, and I know that's terrifying, but they can literally shut down their body and hold their breath underwater. So ants can survive being in water for a really long time, but ants do these really weird things around the world. They'll actually sacrifice themselves and create these ant logs. But this book was really good for me because, one, it's got a central netted dragon on the front, and I love central netted dragons. And it talks about, again, very similar to First Scientist in the sense of like, it talks about how Aboriginal people have had relationships with animals and only taking what you need. If you're going fishing and you catch a massive snapper, just take the snapper. Don't take it. Take what you need. And that's what that book's about. Now, the second book I have today is this is actually a connection to my director at Deadly Science, Zoe O'Hara, and it's one of my favorite books, and it's called John Can the Snake Man. And this is again homage to the La Perouse snake pit, and it's just a fascinating story. These gentlemen for over 100 years, father and sons, had been doing these snake shows at La Perouse. And if you're in Sydney, go and check it out. John Can doesn't do it anymore, but I'm pretty sure Rob Ambrose does it. And they were basically educating the public in this man-made pit full of tiger snakes, king browns. I think that a few of those snakes might have ended up in La Perouse. Sorry, but these men, herpetologists, were really, really important because they developed a lot of relationships with the Aboriginal people in Lake Mungo, and they did some really important research. And I am just fascinated by reptiles and animals because I think they're really cool. So that's one of my favorite books. So I thought I'd bring that along to show you all.
Thank you so much. We don't want to take up too much more of your time. I'm aware that we're getting pretty close to time now, but I just wanted to ask before we go, can you tell us a little bit about Deadly Science and what you're up to with Deadly Science at the moment?
So Deadly Science is really, it's really growing at the moment. It's no longer a backyard job. I'm actually employed for the first time. So right up until probably June this year, I was actually working a full-time job as a research assistant at the University of Sydney and doing this crazy thing called Deadly Science. But, we recently brought on a really awesome team. They're part-time, but we've been still sending the resources. We've been still doing the Zooms. One of the things that we've done at the moment is in Western New South Wales, we've got involved in helping provide books to kids that are stuck in lockdown, because not everyone gets the access to books at home and the internet and things like that. So it was really important that Deadly Science steps up, and we stood up and we delivered these books to these children during the lockdown and educational packs. We also delivered some food to Walgett as well, and we provided hampers to all the families. But we're not only just doing that, we're still sending books, we're still sending resources to schools, we're still getting on Zooms with schools. Our good mate Darren Middleton from Powderfinger did a Zoom with one of our schools, and it's just really important. So if you can spare a few dollar dues and you want me to be quiet, please donate to Deadly Science, because your money and your donation is really well served, and it helps get books and resources out to deadly kids across Australia.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Corey, and thank you to everybody who tuned in to watch and to all of the lovely comments that we've received about how excited people are for this book. And yeah, you can order a copy of The First Scientists right now, booktopia.com.au. Thank you, everyone.
And it may be signed, I believe.
Yes, we do have signed copies.
Yeah, and they did not force me to sign them. I signed them with love. And if you get your coffee now, you will get a signed copy of Deadly Science, the First Scientist book, sorry, not Deadly Science. And yeah, just please jump on, grab a copy. And I can't wait to see you in person when we're allowed to do it. So stay deadly.
Thank you so much.